everyone. Welcome to this session. And thank you to Freedom Games and Wildland for allowing us from RadicalxChange to contribute to the schedule a little bit. Today we're going to talk about harnessing Web3 technologies for good. So blockchain technology means different things for different people. For some people, it's about financial speculation. For others, it's about liberating individuals to exit oppressive regimes. For others, it's about liberating individuals from the obligation to pay taxes. But some of the most meaningful stories are not about exiting communities or extracting value from them, but instead about how this technology offers some unique affordances to strengthen our communities and commit to them. So in this panel, we're going to explore a bit how is it that we can empower collective efforts using blockchain technology. And I couldn't have anyone better with me to do that than Alona Shevchenko and Leon Erichsen. Alona is based in London, but she's from Ukraine. And she is the co-founder and operational lead of Ukraine DAO, and a co-organizer of the Kiev Tech Summit. She's a member of the Chartered Institute of Linguists, and she's interested in training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I was very happy to learn about, as I'm also from Brazil. Not also, you're Ukrainian, but have trained Jiu-Jitsu. Psychology, AI, tech, and space exploration. I just said that Alona is co-founder and operational lead of Ukraine DAO. So before we get started, I just wanted to quickly ask a question for this audience. Who here has ever heard of the word DAO before, this term? Who is familiar with it? Okay, so I'll just say very quickly, and we'll get into this later on, but a DAO is a type of organizational entity that is native to the blockchain. And what's distinct about it is that it has a few of the governance rules of this type of organizational entity are encoded in an algorithmic way on the blockchain and executed on the blockchain. So we're going to talk about what does that mean and what it doesn't mean, because there's a lot of confusion about it as well. But what's interesting about Ukraine DAO is that this is one of the first organizations of this kind to have a real meaningful partnership with a government institution. So Ukraine DAO is officially supported by the Ministry of Digital Transformation in Ukraine, and it's opening a precedent for this type of collaboration between DAOs and governments. And Leon is a social technologist who is working on the philosophy of pluralism, internet governance, and the future of political economies, and in his day job, he works for Gitcoin, who also has a DAO, and he's building products for plural capital provision. And we'll get more into what that means as well in our conversation. So Alona and Leon, the two of you have found very different paths to Web3 technology, but you're similar in your recognition that this technology offers some unique properties or affordabilities in its ability to support and strengthen the communities that you care about. With Ukraine DAO, crypto resources were the first to arrive in Ukraine when the war started. It arrived there faster than any other kind of aid, and Ukraine DAO played a critical role in helping allocate these resources. And with Gitcoin, you are supporting and sustaining a number of open source projects through innovative methodologies for capital provision. So the first thing that I want to explore with you today is, could you explain to us what is a DAO and why is it interesting? What are some of the things that you can only do with a DAO and not with other technologies or organizational entities?
Okay, thanks for the intro, Paula. And I think your definition of DAOs is pretty accurate. I think it's a very wide definition in a way. Like the way that I perceive DAOs is just that you encode some organizational framework or rules. I don't know, like the legal entity of an organization that we would have in the non-crypto world. on a blockchain. And these rules could be, you know, like traditional corporations work that are listed on stock exchanges, for example, that you say, okay, we have shares for this organization, and 1 share is 1 vote in decisions on such and such assets. But as you can kind of encode these rules, there are some organizations that kind of attempt to, so to say, reinvent how organizations operate. So you could play around with new forms of voting mechanisms inside an organization, or new sorts of capital provision mechanisms to its employees or shareholders or other stakeholders. And I feel like what makes kind of organizations on the blockchain or like DAOs interesting is primarily that you can experiment at pretty low cost. So literally like the code that kind of puts together these like political economic arrangements that you might choose, you know, can be written up usually like in between like 500 to 1,000 lines of Solidity code, or I know pretty overseeable amount of code that you could then, you know, edit and tweak to experiment with different forms. I think that's interesting, but I think you could as much if you had the means kind of advocate for the same type of experimentation with like legal frameworks and just kind of drafting new types of legal entities that could then take shape through contracts and national legitimacy instead of like cryptographic legitimacy.
Hello everyone, thank you for having me here, a huge privilege to be here. Oh God, where do I even start about DAOs? It's funny, I went to ETH Barcelona conference in summer, and it was a conference dedicated specifically to social impact projects and DAOs as well. And so much time DAO people spent there just talking about what a DAO is. In our case, a DAO is a community with a certain mission and a blockchain-based wallet. And so we started self-organizing 3 days before the full-scale invasion began, and at first it was just the concept was just for fundraising. Ukraine is a very crypto-friendly country, and a lot of really respectable, reputable Ukrainian charities, they accept crypto. So it's something that made our life much easier. Back then, like we did not have to like worry about helping the charity set up a wallet, you know, all that kind of stuff. Even with like off-ramp, we didn't have the issue either. So we just transferred crypto without having to like guess what time we should sell and transfer it into fiat and so on. And also our government is super crypto friendly, and that helps loads. So yeah, we started as a fundraiser, and then we've raised over, I think, over $7 million worth of Ether in the first days, and we were able to also transfer the funds there very quickly. But the most interesting things started happening also in the beginning, but in parallel. It basically became a place where people could come in, either Ukrainians looking for help or foreigners who wanted to offer some help that was not necessarily financial, but it was very helpful. And so our Discord basically became a place where people could connect, or where the moderators could help them connect with each other, right? So the ones looking for help and the ones prepared to offer that. And so I think that was the first time in history that I'm aware of, and DAOs became, a DAO became a model for like a disaster response. And so, it was exhausting. We stayed up for days, helping to connect everyone. But since then, we've developed into about 13 different working groups, and it's basically a volunteer working groups doing translation, helping, like making subtitles for videos to communicate to the rest of the world what's happening in Ukraine. And so, to many people, it became an opportunity to do something meaningful for Ukraine that they would not be able to do otherwise. So very often when a question comes up, like, why do you need a DAO? Why can you set up a GoFundMe page? Because a GoFundMe page does not create a community, right? And a DAO, Ukraine DAO, became that community, and we are currently helping some incredible Iranian women to organize.
But I'm curious. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious. You organized on Discord, so if you had a GoFundMe page and a Discord channel, would that be sort of similar or no?
No, I'll explain why. I was listening to a podcast the other day with Alex Burnikov. He's Deputy Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. And he said something interesting that it's obvious to me now, but I forgot already. He reminded the host of the podcast that in the beginning, the infrastructure was disrupted, and banking services did not work the way they normally do. And he explains that crypto was Ukraine's lifeline in those days when they were able to, and we were able to transfer the funds to Ukraine and to get the supplies needed for the armed forces of Ukraine specifically, that they could not get into the country otherwise. And so it was really a vital source of help back in those days, and we couldn't have done it with fiat.
This is fascinating because I think that a lot of, so DAO is an acronym for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and a lot of people question why do you need to have a contract running on the blockchain, and whether that's useful or not. But what you're sharing is that this was a specific situation in which only a DAO could have done the sort of organization and allocation of resources that you were able to manage in the first days of the war. Leon, can you share a little bit about Gitcoin and the Gitcoin DAO and what you do there?
Sure. So Gitcoin started about, I think, 4 years ago now. I didn't start it, I just joined the team last year, but it kind of started with a mission to fund open source software developers, so basically software projects that build code that is widely available to the public. Usually, like, that's not the type of arrangement like traditional technology investors, like venture capitalists, are looking for, that you say, okay, we'll just like make our product available to anybody for free. So it was kind of hard to, like, for these open source software developers that do like tremendous contributions to the internet, though, like if you consider that like most of the internet is basically running on like Linux machines, like the Linux open source operating system and all kinds of other like programming languages which are open source, it seemed to be like important to fund like these arguably like very much public goods in a way that is sustainable. And I think we started out with like a pretty, like basically a platform which isn't the heart of Gitcoin anymore, but basically like a bounties platform where like somebody could say, okay, I want this open source tool to be built, I'll give the person that built it X amount of cryptocurrency, and if the tool was built, would pay them. But then in 2018, this book, Radical Markets, came up, co-authored by the founder of RadicalxChange, the co-organizer of this conference that Paula is working with. And one of the ideas there was called Quadratic Voting, and Quadratic Voting is basically decision-making mechanism, like one person, one voting, where, you know, like we vote for a political candidate and you say, I want this candidate, like, or that party, I don't know. But the difference is that you can show how much you like these candidates and how much you don't like them. But in the voting version, you basically give people like a budget of voice credits or like voting tokens, whatever you want to call them. Like say everybody in this room gets 100 voice tokens, and then we ask ourselves, okay, what do we want to do tonight? Do we want to go to a bar, restaurant, or hotel? And hotel is weird, but you'd basically then be able to use this budget of credits to up and downvote these proposals. So you could say, okay, I put 36 credits on option A, 49 credits on option B, and the rest on the other, against the other option. And the quadratic twist is that like 1 credit converts to 1 vote, 4 credits to 2, 9 to 3, 16 to 4. So essentially we allow you to show how much you care, but we make very intense, strong opinions kind of marginally more costly as the more intense your opinion gets. And in fact, the marginal cost per additional vote that you buy grow proportionally. So it's like a pretty elegant way to design this cost function, because you have like proportional relationship between the influence that you can purchase and like your like opinion as an individual, basically, to translate the two into each other. And then like I think in early 2019, the founder of the Ethereum blockchain, Vitalik Buterin, and Glenn Weil, the founder of RadicalxChange, thought about basically doing quadratic voting with money, and basically you would vote on the distribution of some subsidy pool of money to different candidates or projects. So basically, maybe to illustrate this more quickly, like how this gets applied in Gitcoin is that we have some philanthropic organization, like for example the Ethereum Foundation, which is like a wealthy organization that like is kind of wanting to support the Ethereum ecosystem, but there are like thousands of open source software projects in the Ethereum ecosystem, so it's kind of hard to tell, okay, which one should we really support? So they say, okay, we'll put up a matching fund of like $2 million to support the Ethereum ecosystem, and then the community of the Ethereum community can then basically make donations using cryptocurrency on the projects that they like. And in that algorithm that then matches the donations of the community to that matching fund, basically you apply quadratic voting. So like a $1 donation has proportionally more weight than a $100 donation, because a $1 donation in that algorithm is like $1, but a $100 donation only $10. So we kind of, it has like another cool gotcha, which is that, you know, making a small donation actually has proportionally more weight, because like a $1 donation is like kind of the fullest value that you can get. You know, in some cases, if you donate $1, you get like a $200 match or whatsoever. So like we kind of incentivize people to donate to projects to which they might usually not donate, because they might think, okay, why would I donate $1? But in this setup, a small donation can actually go a very long way. But you can still show, like, if you care much more about a project and like donate more, but the cost for like the reward that you get for that in terms of matching kind of decrease over time. So basically what Gitcoin is doing now is like we work with all kinds of different kind of sub-ecosystems and other blockchain ecosystems, like primarily in this Web3 space. And the leaders of these ecosystems usually then put up like matching funding. They sign up projects that they want to support, and then their communities kind of, with their donations, vote on how they want to distribute the funding in their community. So, yeah, we've piloted quadratic funding basically for this, I mean, arguably kind of very niche technological ecosystem, but as much, and I'm pretty excited about that, you could imagine that like someday, let's say, the city of Lodz or the city of Warsaw, or even like a nation state, or like just a neighborhood in a city says, okay, we have like this budget of, I don't know, like $1 million that we want to use to support playgrounds in the city. And then, you know, people could make donations to the playgrounds that they want to renovate, or like advance or whatsoever, or like parks that they want to advance. And based on the input from the citizens, like their donations, which increase the size of the pie, but also act as votes, right, could then steer the funding in a very meaningful way, kind of representing a very nuanced view of the population of the city. So yeah, I think maybe just to like zoom out one step more, what Gitcoin has been doing previously is like we kind of operated these grant programs on a very like operations heavy way. Like we had a pretty simple product, like a very simple platform that wasn't really modular and whatsoever. Because you can imagine that like different matching partners want different rules, you know, like who can participate or who cannot participate, what projects can receive funding. There are like different tweaks to the voting mechanism that you can make to kind of like increasingly foster cooperation between different groups in your ecosystem. So now we're basically building like different open source toolkits ourselves that would allow someone to, I don't know, for example, Ukraine DAO, if they wanted to, like, in the next couple of months to, you know, set up their independent quadratic funding program at very low development cost by utilizing that toolkit that we're building at the moment.
We are actually looking to set up an operational fund right now, so I'll need to speak to you about it afterwards.
Awesome, yeah.
Wonderful. So it's interesting. I'll try to capture some of what you shared here and just trying to establish sort of what is interesting about technology apart from all of the financial speculation and tax evasion. So a few of the things that you're sharing are that crypto can make a critical difference in an environment where traditional financial institutions are not working well. It can provide that sort of support faster than through any other mechanisms. And then on the other hand, it also, this same sort of agility and composability of blockchain technology enables these kinds of very, very innovative experiments on how to fund public goods and address coordination failures in public goods funding that might be more difficult to do otherwise without this financial infrastructure that blockchain offers. Does that sound like a good reflection of what you said?
Kinda, yeah. I would slightly push back on one of the kind of summaries, which is that I think like blockchain is not core to like doing the type of experimentation that we're doing at Gitcoin, basically. I think we kind of happened to choose cryptocurrency because we kind of wanted to fund open source projects in the cryptocurrency space, right? So it kind of makes sense to use the financial means or like, you know, technical means that this community usually uses. But you could, I'm sure, like as much run the same type of application on like not blockchain technology, like using, I don't know, financial institutions to wire the donations and like whether that's PayPal, MasterCard or, you know, some other payment provider and just using kind of more traditional web applications. And actually the web application that Gitcoin has been using up until today, as I said, was kind of pretty much the classical web donation that you would, web application you would know, but more so like just the payments which are not through blockchain technology. So I don't think that this type of like social innovation is limited at all to like this particular technology substrate blockchain, but you know, for like these crypto open source developers, crypto is what they like and what they use to like, what they like to use. But I don't think that would be the right substrate if you wanted to do the same thing in Lodz or in Berlin, right? Like with the local government or whatsoever. Like, I mean, you would need to onboard everybody to this like crypto thing, and like, I don't think we should limit kind of the use of these tools to like kind of, yeah, commitment to cryptocurrency.
So in some ways, blockchain networks sort of provided an interesting space for experimentation with this new mechanism, quadratic funding, but it's not a necessary component.
Right, it's like one way to do it.
Yeah.
You could probably even do it with cash, right? If you had like a small room of people and like.
So this actually brings me to my next question, which is about trust. I'm curious, Alona, how do you think that, why do you think that people trusted Ukraine DAO with $7 million? What were some of the mechanisms? Do you think that blockchain technology played a role in it, or was that about the community or the individuals that were involved with it?
I think a very valuable aspect here is that trust is not required. We have a multi-sig, right?
It's a multi-sig.
Multi-sig stands for multi-signature, and that means that, well, in our case, it's 3 out of 5 quorum. So the way it works is that there is 5 people who can sign Ukraine DAO's transactions. In our case, those people are myself, Steve, and Matt, co-founders. I met them through Free-Rose DAO, where I was previously helping. And then there is Dima Buterin, Vitalik Buterin's father. And Vitalik Buterin is a very prominent figure in the crypto community. He's the co-founder of Ethereum. And his dad, Dima, is also, like I always say, if you think you like Vitalik Buterin, you just haven't met his dad yet. And so both Vitalik and Dima, they are my and Ukraine DAO's very good friends, and they have a reputation, right? And everyone knows that Dima Buterin is not gonna run off somewhere with someone's money. And then the last person is Erichsen, who is the highest selling female NFT artist. And so that set of people combined together creates that trust that the community would need in such cases, right? So in order for the transaction to go through, we need 3 people to sign the transaction. And the moment the transaction is confirmed, everyone can see it, right? So there is transparency that was not previously available for charity efforts, right? So that is how it applies in the case of multi-sig. But we also have a fact-checking group that focuses on fighting Russian propaganda and also amplifying Ukrainian voices at the same time. There is a distinction in our community between just community members and fact-checkers, because we may want to share some info among ourselves that we may not want yet for Russians to know, for example, right? And so this particular working group we approach with the principle on board slowly, off board quickly, right? So we spend time with community members before they join the pod, so that we get to know them and they get to know us, so that by the time they join, it's not some like random person from the internet that we may have issues with half an hour later. We know them by that time, and that makes it much easier. So yeah, there is a lot of considerations that we had to take into account that make us different from many other DAOs. We don't have a governance token, and that was done so that there is no speculation. We did not want any financial speculation around the DAO, because that's not what Ukraine DAO is about. And yeah, stuff like that. Also, our governance is not encoded on blockchain at the moment. The reason being that it would be hard to do in a situation where your environment is changing every single day very quickly. And Ukraine's needs are also changing very quickly. And so it would be very hard to implement, it would be not practical, and it would require more work than the benefit it would bring. So for now, it's basically human-made decision-making. Yeah.
Which is always the best. So Ukraine DAO is exceptional among DAOs because it's an official partner of the Ministry of Digital Transformation in Ukraine. And in that sense, it's opening a new path for how these kinds of bottom-up organizations can collaborate with governments. So can you share with us what does that look like? And how do you see DAOs and governments collaborating in the future?
So the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine is my favorite one, my favorite ministry in Ukraine. And it's a side of our government that is working to digitalize all government services. So the purpose is for anything that involves interaction with the state to be doable digitally, online. And so Ukraine is already like super digitally developed. So we have our ID in an app. We can, I don't know, pay a fine in the app or sign a petition through the DIA app. So a lot of services that in other countries are not available online, they've developed them. And they also created the kind of support well, in the first days of the full-scale invasion, but it was available already by that time, that we took for granted as Ukrainians. But then I realized that people in other countries were really shocked that we had it. For example, we have a Telegram bot where you can, it's called Yevorog, and you can use that bot to report.
A vote?
A bot. A Telegram bot. You can use it to report to the government the movement of the enemy troops or equipment. And you can take a photo and geolocate it, and you send it off, and then you just delete the pictures or whatever. And to me, it was normal, you know. And then I was on Twitter, and I was scrolling through my feed, and I saw two people, I can't remember where they were from, I saw two people discussing it. I was like, what is happening there? Like, it's so weird, like, that's normal, right? And then I realized they were shocked that we had this bot, and it was shocking to me that they are shocked, you know? And so we have so many things like that, that people are just completely, surprised when they see it. So that is all made by, well, most of those services by the Ministry of Digital Transformation. So before we were even introduced to them, we were sharing their products to help Ukrainians, to provide that info support. And then we had a call with them. We basically operate completely autonomously. But very often we will need some, I don't know, logistical help for Kyiv Tech Summit, for example, or advice. They obviously have much more experience and knowledge than we have. And so, they really, really helped us to organize Kyiv Tech Summit, which was the Web3 hackathon that we hosted in Kyiv in a bomb shelter. And so when we were arranging it, a lot of people were super critical of the idea, and they maybe haven't been to Ukraine recently or at all, and to them, considering what they saw on TV, it sounded like a completely crazy idea, and they were like, are you guys thinking to do a hackathon during wartime? And you were like, yeah, that's what we are planning to do. But Minsifra, that's the name of the ministry, the shortened version in Ukrainian. They're like, yeah, like that's a great idea. Let's go, you know, let's do it. And I don't think there are many governments in the world that would be this open-minded. So we really appreciate it.
I'm curious, are you familiar with the work of Audrey Tang in the digital ministry in Taiwan?
I'll admit that I'm very sorry, but not yet.
No, so this is fascinating because Audrey is one of our greatest inspirations in our work at RadicalxChange, and it's there's a somewhat similar story. She was a leader of a hacktivist group in Taiwan, and they occupied the parliament to protest a particular piece of legislation that they thought was going to undermine Taiwanese sovereignty in relationship to China. And they occupied the parliament, this hacktivist group, and they conducted deliberations inside the parliament and broadcast them to society. And all of the proposals that they developed were in the end approved by the government. And Audrey, who was one of the leaders of this movement, became digital minister of Taiwan, and she's now just recently ahead of the Ministry of it's called MODA, Digital Affairs, yeah, in Taiwan. And this kind of partnership between hacktivist groups on the ground and a government institution that really understand how to listen to them and collaborate with them is extraordinarily valuable, especially in moments of crisis. So during the pandemic, Audrey's digital ministry collaborated with these hacktivist groups on a number of different projects. So for example, mapping where masks were available in different pharmacies throughout the city through an app where everyone could collaboratively add that data so that people wouldn't have a sense of panic about not being able to buy masks because they could just find this app. And there are many other interesting examples of the kind of work that they do. And when I learned about Ukraine DAO, what I was thinking about is that you are taking hacktivism to the blockchain, because this is the first time that I'm hearing about a hacktivist group, which is a group that is organizing from the bottom up and using digital tools to coordinate better, but also using blockchain technology, which can be very helpful because all of this work, as Leon was mentioning, when it's volunteer work, when it's open source work, it's very, very hard to fund it. So I feel like it's a new breakthrough to sort of bridge this sort of hacktivism with blockchain tech and DAO, and I find it really fascinating.
At this conference that I mentioned, someone came up to me and they were like, I have a question about Ukraine DAO and the government. I was like, go ahead. And they asked, you know, when the war ends, and in Ukraine we don't say when the war ends, we say after the victory, after Ukraine's victory. They're like, what if you don't want to be associated with the government anymore? How are you going to escape from them? And it was such a funny question to me because first of all, no one is holding us, and it was a privilege to us to be introduced to them in the first place, and then to be able to work with them. And it's something that I always think that good cooperation comes from a place where it's beneficial for both sides, and it's like
totally. It's
voluntary and it's intentional, right? And so, yeah, I think it's a really good precedent for a DAO and a government, instead of fighting each other, to be complementing each other, right? And so sometimes we are asked, can a DAO replace a state government, for example? And I think it would be probably a simplistic and reductionist approach. At Kyiv Tech Summit, we were visited by Mikhailo Fedorov, Ukraine's vice prime minister, and he is the minister of digital transformation as well, and Alex Bornikov was also the deputy minister. And he explained something that's very obvious to me. There are different missions, there are different tasks to complete, right? And for some of them, you want decentralization. But for other ones, you really don't want it. Like, it would be a horrendous experience. And imagine a decentralized army in a war with Russia, right? Russia invades, and it's like every soldier just runs around wherever they want. It's terrible. You need to have central command in place, right? Coordinating things.
But even at Ukraine DAO, it seems like there's a lot of sort of centralized coordination. It's sort of an essential part of coordinating
100%.
group. Yeah.
And if we didn't have it, we would have done a lot of damage, I think, to Ukrainians, because very often, people mean well, supporters of Ukraine, right? They mean well, but they can sometimes do something that is maybe Ukrainians don't want them to do it, right? Or maybe it can even be like re-traumatizing to us, this kind of support. And so one of the main principles that we've had from the very beginning is to try to not cause any harm to Ukrainians and to not do things that are in the Ukrainian society considered right now inappropriate. You cannot ensure that without a certain level of centralization. And I also learned a new word recently, re-centralization. I can't remember where I heard it, but it's like conscious centralization back from being too decentralized. And so I think a lot of DAOs struggle because they try to solve too many problems from the beginning when they do not anticipate yet all the problems that they might have. And then they end up in a situation where they agreed on something so they cannot go back, but some issues are there that they struggle to address, and so
they make it too complicated because they want everything to be
100%,
decentralized. You know, in the crypto world, there's a very strong decentralization ethos, and anything that is centralized is seen as like a big violation of that ethos. But then it doesn't work in practice, right? When the DAOs that are actually having lots of concrete impact, they do require a good amount of just central coordination for things to function. So it's interesting to try to understand where is it that decentralization can be valuable and also where it isn't.
Yeah, I think, sorry.
No, go ahead.
On that note, I think it's kind of, usually the system that seems to be like feasible is like kind of this federated structure of like power, right? So actually I think the military example was kind of good because, I mean, in a way, military is decentralized, that it is like, or at least in the ideal case, like its actions are democratically legitimized by members of a nation, right? And then if you look at something like NATO, which at first sight seems like this vast centralized army, right? If it would be like super accountable and actually like, I can't really talk to this because I'm not a NATO expert, but like in theory, it's like all its actions are kind of legitimized by the citizens of its member states, and then the representatives of these citizens make collective decisions that kind of the citizens gave these representatives buy-in for to participate in. So it's kind of you can maintain like legislative decentralization, like kind of passing the rules and passing the mandates in kind of democratic ways by kind of delegating power to leaders or representatives, but then the execution of these rules might be in like a kind of dark like war room with like the defense ministers of like these countries, or I don't know what NATO's doing sort of behind the doors, but yeah.
Centralized and decentralized governance processes. I'm curious about your trajectories in the blockchain space. There's a lot if you start reading about blockchain technology, if you just Google about it, you will see a lot of buzzwords, right? Like decentralization and empowerment and banking the unbanked. And it can be confusing to try to navigate what's meaningful and what's just marketing. And the two of you have found your ways around it and were able to do and are doing extremely meaningful work. So could you share with us what were your trajectories like in this space?
Sure. So when I discovered kind of this ecosystem, I was kind of on a very different trajectory at the time, working at like a private bank in wealth management, like a super, like, I don't know, traditional financial industry. And
on the dark side, working for the dark side.
yeah, in a way. But then, yeah, there was this interest, because it was like the summer 2017 when there was like this kind of bull market in cryptocurrency, which obviously like financial investors of all sorts might have been like looking at the charts and be like, okay, that is interesting. Like, and then I was tasked to kind of check it out, and fortunately the same night discovered like a presentation of Vitalik, who Alona is working with, like on TechCrunch, kind of introducing Ethereum, and I was like pretty struck by it, that you could kind of, you know, just programmatically build in like organizational structures or like voting systems or like cash systems, monetary systems, and thought it's maybe more interesting than banking, like, because I was also, like at the time I studied like business but also philosophy, like kind of combining the two. And as we kind of anyways like discussed a lot of like social choice theory and like different, you know, market mechanisms, I thought at that time like it seems like obvious that innovation in that realm would happen as well in the blockchain space. And then a year later discovered Len's work, like, and the RadicalxChange's work, and this is kind of where I found my, I don't know, ideological home, and kind of pulled me out of crypto in a way again. While I still work with a like blockchain organization, I kind of had to realize that I don't think the problem of society is really like the technology substrate that we're using, really. I think it's more so like the way like organizations are organized and structured, like the voting mechanisms that we use.
The social technologies.
Yeah, the social technologies, yeah. But not the information technologies, basically. So, yeah, I get kind of interested in it because I thought there might be some social innovation that might obviously happen, and then found RadicalxChange as a paradigm that I really like.
Cool. It's similar to my trajectory too, because I was also drawn to the blockchain space. Although I was in the not in the business world, I was in the civic tech world. But I also thought that in starting to learn about RadicalxChange and seeing the intersection between or some of how blockchain technology could offer a home for interesting experiments in governance, I started to be interested in it. And what about you, Alona? I know that there are many stories to share there.
Yeah. So in my case, it started. I don't even know at what point I got interested. Well, I guess I was always curious about crypto, but as many other people, you just don't know where to start because you look it up and it looks complex. And like when people Google a DAO, for example, they read like a definition that is completely different from what Ukraine DAO is like, right? And that puts them off. So they may not necessarily even tell us that they want to join, right? And so to me, in terms of background, I was a paralegal, education paralegal in my past life. And I was absolutely miserable as a paralegal because it was an environment where I just couldn't, I was never going to succeed in that atmosphere because it's a very different power structure, right? So you need to be sometimes not a very nice person to people to get ahead, right? So it's not like a community of a collaborative nature that Web3 is, or at least, you know, social impact side of it is. And so I had like a breaking point where in the beginning of the pandemic, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it was at the time where all GPs were shut, and so I just didn't know about, I could tell there was something wrong, but I wouldn't go to the doctors because I could tell it wasn't COVID, and so I didn't want to bother anyone. So by the time I got to the hospital, I was already like going into a coma. I got that just on time. And so basically, it's a wake-up call, right? When you are suddenly told, when you thought that you were completely fine, that actually things are going to be a little bit more difficult for you, all right? And to me, that was the best thing to have happened in my life. So people are often very surprised when I say it, but I really mean it, because before that happened, I was 26 at the time, and I had this illusion that I feel like many young people have this illusion that things are going to work out. Like, you know, you think things do not work the way I want to in my life, but it's going to sort itself out. And then at that point, you realize that it's not actually going to sort itself out, and you will need to do stuff for things to work, to go the way you want to, right? And so that's gave me kind of the courage to stop doing the things that I didn't want to be doing, like my job at the time, for example. So I left.
You know, one parallel that this reminds me of is that in the Gov0 movement, in which Audrey Ting was one of the leaders that I was saying, there's this motto that is about stop asking why nobody's doing this, you are the nobody. And I think that realization of like taking upon yourself the responsibility for changing the things that you care about is very much like sort of core to the 100%. Activist spirit.
So something that's like an approach that I have in common with diabetes and with the war. Accept the diagnosis, do not accept the prognosis. So if you ask someone on 20th,
I love that.
Right?
Accept the diagnosis, but don't accept the prognosis.
Yep. So if you ask someone on the 23rd of February whether Ukraine was going to be still fighting and winning so far the Russian invasion, the most optimistic person, well, at least if you ask, you know, somewhere not in Ukraine, the most optimistic person would laugh at you, right? Like it was. It would be called like a pipe dream, because all the experts, both in Moscow and in the West, they were all saying that Ukraine is going to last maybe up to 3 days, and that's it. That's it. There is no, you know, there's no options there. But to us, it was never an option to surrender, because there is nothing worse to us than the Russian occupation, and freedom is at the core of our culture. So we knew, like, we knew that it just wasn't even something that we could consider. And so, yeah, we did not accept the prognosis. We've accepted that Russia has invaded. We've done everything in our power to prevent it. But once it started, the response from everyone in the country was very, very united. And something that Russians don't understand about us is that we are not acting on someone's order. So this concept of individual autonomy that is it's like native to us, right? It's in our blood. Like we are all, you know, we grow up just knowing this. To Russians, it's non-existent, and so that's why they waste time making like deep fakes with Zelensky, our president, telling Ukrainians to lay down their arms, and it doesn't matter to us. You know, if we watch a video telling us to lay down the arms, because we did not pick up the arms because of the video, you know, and yeah, so this concept of like individual autonomy is what makes Ukraine right now essentially work like a DAO, because Ukraine has one mission, and everyone in the country and all the Ukrainians outside and all their friends have the same mission. Right, and everyone is doing whatever they can with their skill set to contribute towards that mission. And then there is Ukraine DAO, that's like a DAO on top of that DAO that Ukraine is itself. So that's yeah, I don't know if this makes sense, but...
No, it makes perfect sense. And I love sort of the construction of sort of what is the mindset that makes a hacktivist or a citizen. But I'm also curious about what were some of the other things that you've done in the blockchain space prior to Ukraine DAO.
You mean myself?
Yeah.
Oh, so have we mentioned Free Rose DAO?
Not yet.
Okay, so before launching Ukraine DAO, I was in Free Rose DAO helping as a community and operations manager. I saw them on Twitter. I always was very upset by the sentence of Ross Ulbricht, who is the creator of Silk Road Marketplace, who is serving a double life sentence, plus 40 years with no parole, for making a website. All right, so it was basically a website where people could trade anything that they wanted, apart from things that could harm other people. So you couldn't buy weapons there, for example. And so the people, 80% of the traffic on their website was weed for personal use. People who were dealing with whatever was sold on the website have all been released. Ross is in prison essentially forever, and the only way to get released for him is to get presidential pardon. I have 2 law degrees, and I look at his case as a lawyer, right? And I'm like, is it a violent person? No, it's a first-time offender, it's a non-violent offense. Is he going to harm someone if he is released? No, he won't. It just doesn't make any sense to me that he is in prison. 10 years already, almost. And so when I saw the DAO, I was super happy, and I joined immediately as a volunteer moderator, because it was finally a way to do something for him. The broader purpose of the DAO is to advance criminal justice reform. And so it's organized by his close family and friends. Yeah, they are very consistent. I'm very happy that the initial efforts have carried on very consistently, and they were the ones who helped me launch Ukraine DAO. So without them, Ukraine DAO would never exist. To me, that's a testament to kind of how important it is to not tolerate injustice, even if it's not in front of you. Injustice in one place normalizes injustice in another place. Yeah.
So on that note, your DAO, Ukraine DAO, has inspired the creation of other DAOs that you're also supporting. So can you share a little bit about that?
So the newest one that we are helping is Iran DAO. And it started when my friend Jaden messaged me saying that she knows she has this amazing Iranian friend who lives in London as well, who is looking into setting up an Iran DAO in order to support the Iranian women that are protesting, and they are fighting fiercely with the Iranian state, following the murder of Mahsa Amini, who was she was an Iranian woman who was murdered for having a bit of hair sticking out of her hijab. And so I cannot say that I understand what Moral, who is one of the key people within the DAO, what she's going through, but I can relate to her in terms of what it feels like being oppressed, and also what it feels like to feel pain for your people and to not be there on the ground, right? And it's often people just discard you if you're not there. They say, "How can you speak for Ukraine if you're not in Ukraine right now?" And that's a really vicious thing to say. And from the very beginning, I was trying to give her as much reassurance about that. You don't become any less Ukrainian from not having bombs. You don't need to have bombs dropped on your head in order to have the right to speak, right? And the same way, I told her that the only important thing for me is for her to make sure that she remains authentic and loyal to the Iranian women that she is willing to help. So no one should expect her to be grateful for the help, right? If you're genuinely helping someone, you should not expect anything back.
And how can anyone listening to this support either Ukraine DAO or Iran DAO?
So Iran DAO, you can look it up on Twitter. It's called Iranian _DAO. And Ukraine DAO, Ukraine _DAO. It's a verified account, Ukraine DAO's one. And then we have a link tree in the Twitter bio, and you click on it, and you can see all the different options for what you can do.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us, Alona and Leon. This was a pleasure, and we all learned a lot today from you. Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Paula.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihre Ausreise
Network is, as the name suggests, a network, and it's global. We work all around the world. We're based in the US. We have about 159 partners in the United States right now, and the bulk of our partners are outside, nearly 500 in total.
Atlas Network, it connects people from all over the world, defending the idea of human dignity, defending human rights and personal liberties.
Atlas Network is focusing on, I think, the most important and moral cause in the entire world.
We partner with local innovators, local leaders who understand conditions on the ground in communities facing real challenges. We look at the people from the worldwide freedom movement that are passionate, are ready to make a difference, understand local conditions, and we invest in them.
At Atlas Network, we unleash individual ingenuity to enrich humanity.
The United States does not have a lock on the idea of freedom and liberty. Those ideas are beyond borders.
One of the main goals of Atlas Network is to eradicate poverty around the world, and we do that by investing millions of dollars in our partners' work every year.
Historically, wealthy nations around the world have tried to help low-income countries develop. The way we've been doing it traditionally has not really been working. So there's a movement to do development differently, and that means we need to step back as outsiders and rethink the role that we're playing in helping people in low-income countries achieve their dreams.
We want to make the world a better place. We want to make the world a freer world.
All of us want to leave a legacy and be part of something big to make a better world. This is exactly the work of Atlas Network.
With our growing number of hundreds of successful partners, we're stronger than ever.
Changing the world.
Changing the world.
Changing the world
starts together
with us.